Welcome to The Elephant in the Org, presented by the Fearless People Experience. Do you know those things in the workplace that make work suck, but remain unchanged? Well, those are the elephants we're here to talk about. We believe that these topics can and should be addressed with common sense, courage, and compassion. We may not have all the answers, and we're definitely not always going to be right. But we're here to build a better people experience. We gotta start somewhere. Let's go.
Welcome back to The Elephant in the Org. I'm Danny Gluch, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Cacha Dora and Marion Anderson. And today we're very excited to be joined by our guest, Kim Minnick. Kim is a tenured people ops leader and total nerd for HR. Love that. Love being nerds. We're all nerds here. Kim loves bringing elegant simplicity to workflows, programs, and operations. When the world went remote in 2020, Kim became obsessed with curating fantastic employee experiences for anyone, anywhere. Now she's focused on offering fractional people ops support to startups and building playbooks to help companies create great human-centered people operations processes. Today's Elephant in the Org is on performance reviews and how we shouldn't rate our employees like they're a Yelp review, which was Kim's idea. Love that. Come take a listen. Welcome to the podcast, Kim Minnick. Kim, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim. I am a lifelong people ops nerd. I went into people ops really early in my career, very intentionally, went to school for it, because I thought it would be very casual and very black and white. And in 2015, I moved to San Francisco and started doing VC startups, which is nothing casual and not super easy, and it's only colors of gray. So spent most of my career in the startup life, and in the last year, kind of went out and on my own, did fractional, have really been able to dive into some of my passions that I think we're going to talk about today. And help more people make work better. That's me.
I love that. I imagine the lifelong, 7-year-old Kim just being like, ooh, I'm diving into HR.
I want to be middle management.
Yeah.
I want to help the people.
It's funny that these things can even be our passions, but I think what you said of helping more people make work better for the three of us at Fearless PX and the hosts here, we like to make work suck less, right? And I think that I'm passionate about this, and I'm glad other people are too. And the elephant that we're talking about is something that we all share a passion for, and it's weird, but that's okay. Performance reviews, because holy smokes, they're bad.
Oh, well, they are a thing. They don't
exist.
Have to be bad.
Have you all noticed? I don't know if this is I'm just noticing it now because I'm talking about it more, but this year, for some reason, performance reviews are all over LinkedIn. Everyone's talking about it. They're all talking about how bad they are. Why are we doing this? It's terrible. Like they've just woken up to the fact that they weren't always shit, No,
they're just louder about it now because they used to just say all of this in Slack but I think with, this rise of more of a digital first community effort, I think people are like, well, hold on, if it sucks here, maybe it sucks somewhere else too.
Is it maybe just that how many people have had to change jobs over the last 5 years that they're like, wait, you guys don't do it well either?
Or
I thought only our company did it bad.
Or you've got companies who choose not to do it at all, just to, for whatever their choices are, right? You've got your companies like, well, we're going too fast. We're going so fast. We can hold off on that.
We don't have time to check in.
We don't have time to check in. That performance review is the same thing. I think, Marion, to your point on LinkedIn, where I've seen people who were like one-on-ones with a manager.
Never heard of them.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll come to the conversation about linking pay and performance maybe later on in this, but that, Cacha, to your point, that's one of the fundamental reasons. Companies, are shy to talk about anything money related right now, especially if they've been having challenges in this shit. Our economy's great. Everyone keeps telling me, I'm sure it is. But from a business perspective, it's been impossible to meet bonuses and give increases for many businesses, right? Where there's been layoffs. So I think that a lot of people shy away from it. And that's a big part of the reason, but I'm sure they'll get.
And how many like bad layoffs have been under the guise of poor performance? Like so many, instead of just biting the bullet and say, we overhired, we made a mistake, we did our projections wrong, we're cutting all of our low performers. Like, oh man, just making that hill harder to climb.
And it's such an umbrella at that point, Kim, right? Like, it's not even like, it's factual, but it's not factual. It's just a nice like sticker to just an excusal sticker, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think review, right? I'm big on review, reflection, whether it was critical thinking or designing strategy or even therapy, right? One of the most important elements, one of the most important first fundamental steps is honest reflection, an assessment of really where you are. So I get why organizations would need to do this. You need to have an honest assessment of where your people are and how people are doing.
Yes.
I think part of the problem is that when they're trying to do performance reviews, that it's not always an honest assessment because of conflicts of interest, like what Marion was talking about, among other things, not just compensation, but a whole load of stuff.
Yeah. And we don't, to your point, I love a reflective process, right? Like, what has happened over the last 6 months or year? Let's be really honest about it. But also, like, digging into the memory banks is tough. Are we even using the right questions to ask the right reflections? Or are people spending more time trying to figure out what is HR trying to get me to answer in this question? Like, it's not really a reflective question. So I agree. Like, I'm all about reflections, and I think we need to tweak some things to enable them.
I love what you said there, Kim, because I think what you really highlighted, right, is it sounds like from what you just said, in organizations where psychological safety isn't there, the review process is protective of the self, which then gives a level of dishonesty.
Man, yeah, I wish I would have said that, but that was way better. Yes.
The other thing is, if you think about this entire process, right, in my 8 billion years of working, right, I've never had, ever had a good experience of any form of performance review, right? No, not one.
Now, let me ask you a question, just a side path. Have you ever had good feedback? Great. Okay, great.
Buckets,
I'm gonna
right?
put that one in the pocket for later.
Exactly. Buckets of good feedback, but reviews have been, and for all the reasons that we know, they're too far apart. Who can remember what you did, a year ago? Ridiculous. The manager that is being tasked with giving you the review is completely not skilled or trained or prepared or supported to do it well, right? And they've come into this situation where they're having to, justify to you why you're a 3, but actually you're a 4, but you're only going to be a 3 because the bell curve says so, right? And when it comes to calibration, your 4 won't stand up against Jimmy's 4, so you're going to be a 3, like all that bullshit. And, I guess the thing that really puts cold shivers down my spine is when I hear of people still having a performance review on a piece of paper with a tick box type thing, right? And you're like, really? 2024, we're still doing that? Like, we're still open to that kind of nonsense? And also, going back to the thing about managers, I was scrolling through TikTok yesterday, and there was a woman on TikTok who was in a car sobbing, breaking her heart, because she had just been laid off, but she was laid off because she was told the company's having to make layoffs, you're being laid off because of your performance. But she'd never had a performance review, and no one had ever given her feedback about her performance. And she's like, what? And you're sitting there
Blindsided. Oh my God.
As an HR practitioner, you're sitting there going, love, you weren't made redundant, you were terminated and you had no input to it. And I hope you're going to go, I don't know where you live, but I hope you're going to go to your local Labour Bureau and raise a case, because that's nonsense, right? Like how that was done. But unfortunately, if you live in some states, you probably don't have much support with that, right? But it keeps coming back to, I guess, three things: senior leadership, no conscience, no awareness, just think hire them, fire them. So a lot of senior leaders are very undereducated on these things. People leaders, HR leaders who are either being steamrollered, which is often the case, unfortunately, or I hate to say, but maybe just aren't able to back up what they're saying and have that credibility and stand up for people. Again, that happens. And these poor middle managers who are just being thrust in and left to deal with it. And, you know, I mean, I can think back to the first time I had to do it and I had no support and no training and whatever. I'm still scarred by that, as I'm sure the poor people that were being reviewed by me are still scarred by that. What a mess.
Yeah.
What a mess. And I think, like, personal perspective as someone who deeply loves performance conversations, we've just lost the plot. Like, my gosh, I have designed some textbook perfect performance reviews. On paper, they were great. Hey, spoiler alert, everybody else in the company has another job to do. Like, performance reviews isn't their job. It's my job, right? So, like, how can I take this beautiful theory of performance management and turn it into great feedback conversations? Not these, like, here's your paper review. It's been 6 months. Let's talk about your goals. But some of the reviews, some of the feedback that sticks in my head was immediate. It was instant. I knew what it was talking about. So how can we reframe our entire performance management system so the reviews are these helpful conversations, these genuinely, I want to help you grow your career. I want to help you develop a skill. Like, how do we change that? And I think we have all the tools. We've got tools for instant feedback, instant connection. We've got documentation so we can write things down and be careful about the words we use. Like, why are we still doing something that we did in the 40s, the 1940s? Reviews have barely changed. We added 360 feedback. That's what we've done in 80
Which
years.
may have made it worse.
Which
Now
may have made it
360
worse.
feedback is like, now it's a month-long project that I've put off for 11 months. I'm sorry, that's not happening. I worked at a school. No one's doing that project.
And why should if I'm a product manager, why should my marketing person be reviewing me? They don't know my job. If I'm an engineer, why should my sales counterpart be reviewing my performance? You don't understand engineering. Give
But
me
I could
feedback.
see if they were, and going back to your point, if they were collaborating, right? If you're in HR and you're working on some project with marketing, and in the moment they have some feedback for you.
Feedback, not
Makes
review.
sense.
But it's
11
also
months
real
later,
time. It's
yeah,
real time
it's
at
real
that point,
time.
Danny,
It's
right?
such a
Yeah, like
difference.
you're in the project, the feedback happens, you take it, you move, you actually incorporate it. I almost said assimilate. I meant incorporate.
No, assimilate.
Yeah.
It reminds me of one soccer coach that I had, where at halftime he would bring up your stats. He's been keeping stats all the first half. Danny, you had 4 turnovers. Stop trying to pass the ball there. They're stealing it. Don't do that anymore. It's like, oh, that's really helpful. I'm now going to make a change mid-game, right? Like, I'm going to make those adjustments. And he told me after the game, I'd be like, where were you at halftime? That wasn't very helpful a month later.
A great coach helps in the moment.
Yeah.
But let's call out this particular elephant, right? In that, Danny, that scenario is beautiful and you're spot on. That's what the coach is there to do, right? The clue is in the name, coach, right? If you're managing a team, if you're a sales director, for example, right? What you're told is you're there to make sure we hit this $10 million revenue goal, right? How you do it is up to you, but you have a team, right? And there's no emphasis on, everybody talks a good game. Yeah, we'll get you coaching. We'll get you executive coaching. Here's some training. Yada, yada, right?
No.
But actually, nobody links the two to think, well, if I'm actually more focused on my people and I'm coaching them real time, giving them feedback midday, I actually might hit that goal rather than be flapping about, stressing about the sales, ignoring the people, and then it all goes to shit.
Yeah.
So
They just hit the big red demand more button.
We are.
Because that works for a short period.
We're short. We're short. We've got X amount of time. We've got X amount of time. Everyone hustle, hustle, hustle. Like, we've got to hit this number instead of like, how did your last pitch go? What was the body language?
1,000 salespeople and then lay them off when they don't perform.
Oh my God.
Like,
I've been in companies who've been like that. Yeah. I've been in companies where, no joke, the sales team was the revolving door. It was the sales team, and like the glass door was all about why that sales team, you know, was there and then not there, and it all came down to performance. But then, like, you get to ask the question of like, okay, well, was it their performance? Was it those projections? Right? Like,
no one ever talks about the projections.
Yeah, like there's so many factors that come into it, right? That when, like, I can't imagine just going into a performance review and being like, oh, I didn't know that was the goal.
Yeah,
that would have been great to have known.
Exactly. You know, in HR,
just like,
you know, we say this all the time, and I'm sure you all have heard this. You're going to roll your eyes when I hear it. And yet it still happens. There should be no surprises in reviews, right?
Oh God, I roll was unnatural. I couldn't stop it.
I know. And we preach it. We say it at the start of here's the deal. We say it at the start of every review cycle, and then we don't talk about it again until the start of the next review cycle. And instead of enabling and working with the business flow and cadence to put those reflection periods in, like sales, I know you close deals, do a reflection after you close deals. Yep. Engineering, I know you've got sprints. After this sprint and your retro, do a self-reflection, do a peer reflection. Like, we have opportunities in the business to make this a 20, 30-minute task instead of a 3-day all-consuming process.
So let's explore that a little bit, because you know, in the last decade, there's been a real kind of, you know, explosion, I guess, of software solutions that are designed to help this, of varying levels of good to great. Some of them maybe not so great, but even the most basic ones are pretty good. You've got like 4 questions, you know, you go in, you do your 4 questions, your manager does their 4 responses to you, and you should have a lovely conversation, and it should be very simple and very quick. But psychologically, leaders, managers, still, even senior leaders, because I've had to die on this hill many times in the last few years, where the perception is still that, oh my God, this takes forever, it's going to take days, and you're like, it shouldn't, though, because if you're having those conversations little and often, all you're doing is summarizing what you've been talking about for the last.
I'm not so sure they're really complaining about the time as much as the emotional, psychological burden of digging up and having to do that.
It's both.
Or what about the effort of just writing it all out?
Right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
it's a
time plus
hard
effort
thing
combo
to do, and the longer space, as you were talking about, that longer time makes it harder, right?
100%. But it's all a lot of it's perception. Right? Yeah. Perception is reality. And no matter how hard as a people leader you are given the evidence and you're supporting the facts and you're able to like say, but this is how it works. It's absolutely impenetrable, in my experience, to really change that perception. And it goes back to something that we talk a lot about on various subjects on this podcast, is that so much of the terminology and the systems and practices that we use have become so tarnished, they're so damaged, their credibility is so low that, you know, it's like many things that I feel like I've said recently, it needs to go on an island with a stick of dynamite and be blown up, because as soon as you say the word performance review, performance in general,
right? Yeah,
it's the same thing. It's like, oh fuck, you know, right?
Yeah.
And it almost, and it's not just a rebrand. We're not polishing a turd here. It actually has to be completely reimagined and repositioned. And the problem is so systemic.
And that's why I liked Kim's solution of You don't have to call it a performance review when you're just reflecting on the process, right? And I think this is a big sort of shift in mindset is instead of measuring outcome and performance productivity, reflecting on processes, talking about processes, talking about skills, competencies, attitudes, behaviors that actually make work go well, instead of just that big more button, right? The why didn't you throw that ball better, right? That's not coaching.
It's not just like the performance, right? It's not just your productivity. It's your approach to work. Like, how are you using, insert trendy word, values, operating principles, whatever, to guide your decisions, to help, solve conflict, to get over failures or stumbles? Like, how are you doing all of this? Not just what are you doing? Because I think if we just focus on the what, that's when you get the brilliant jerks, and that's when you get the poor performance overall, but like high achievements. So I think it's really important that we think about performance reviews and performance management as a way to, like, again, genuinely care for the human. Like, there was this really fun study done in Australia before performance reviews became really ubiquitous. It was in between World War I and World War II. It was a group of women, always at like a sewing factory, right? And they were doing a study on what did better productivity. And they started looking at, like, what happens when we change the hours for flexibility? What happens when we give them more supervision? What happens when we talk about their future? And they found that productivity increased when their employees were cared for, when they genuinely felt cared for. And I think, like, we could do that same study today in remote, in hybrid, in fully on-site environments. And I think you would find those who felt cared for, not just, I'm producing and I'm getting a review and you're telling me how good I am, but those who are like, you see me as a whole human who is also helping your business accomplish something. I think if we took that approach to review conversations or performance management or growth and development or whatever you want to call it, it makes it better.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting call out because I think every single one of us was kind of like, well, duh, but but also like so I'm in my master's program right now and we're going through all these leadership models and stuff like that, right? And the emphasis and de-emphasis on the employee through leadership models is astounding, right? When you think about, like, oh, this leadership model is really about the progression of the business and, like, how do you affect the business? And then you've got other leadership models, which is like, oh, pay attention to the employee. They're going to produce based on their level of care, and then it'll help the business. And just these, like, opposing viewpoints that come into the workplace, whether it's from people who've been in school or people who've had managers and they learned from that manager, right? There's no manager school. So everyone's going to learn from somewhere. And sometimes it is I'm going to learn by being that manager who's a task, who's only going to go off of the numbers, like Marion was talking about, right? Like, where if that's their emphasis, then the people aren't going to be the emphasis, and you're going to have the rotation. And I wish more people paid attention to studies like that, Kim, because we all very much talk about the fact that humans are people. Yeah. They're not resources, right?
The majority of them together is a resource, but humans are individuals and beautiful little sparkles.
Yeah. Can I just be really interested? Because obviously being in the startup world, VC world, right? I think that, I love that area of work as well, because I love being able to get in somewhere and lay a good foundation rather than have to, quite frankly, go in later on and clean up someone else's mess, right? So you want to always go in best foot forward, academically and practically what works, and you're going to lay those foundations. But here's the reality in a startup, right? Is that especially, if there's not a huge amount of funding, then the founding team you tend to be fairly junior, not that experienced. You don't have a lot of money to spend, so you're not bringing in the heavy hitters. Again, if you're not, if you're pre-seed or whatever, you don't have a lot of cash, right?
Yeah.
And so that's very difficult because, as Cacha said earlier on, we don't have time for that. We're growing too fast. And then as you start to see people are getting pissed off because nobody's talking to them about the performance, then you're trying to backtrack and do something. Then people are messing it up because they don't have the practical experience to do it. And you're constantly having to course correct. But one of the big challenges at that point, I think, is that in a startup, whatever level you're at as a leader, you're wearing multiple hats, right? You know, if you're in as HR, you're probably also doing operations, and you're probably maybe doing a bit of sales, and we're all doing this. And the emphasis is not on the people, and the emphasis is on the task. And so how, in your experience, and this might be impossible to answer, I don't know, but in your experience, how do you think you can try to make that as good a start as possible to lay the foundations for managers to be focused on their people first and the task second? Because that's a very controversial thing to say.
Yeah.
And it's probably something that, you know, we're always doing stealth work, right? We're always hiding the pill inside the bit of cheese like we do for the dogs. How it's true.
Yeah.
How do you approach that? I mean, because it's...
Yeah. Oh my gosh. First off, I don't think you should have a podcast with impossible to answer questions.
We should look at that. We really should. We should think about that.
Look, I don't know what I'm doing here, but maybe. No, I think, look, performance reviews are hard. And to your point, they are anxiety inducing. If you come in as an HR person and you're like, we're going to do reviews, you're not going to do yourself any favors. The first thing I would say is, look, people do like to give feedback, and maybe that feedback is just recognition. Maybe we're starting with, someone used the term the other day, honey roasting, and I am now obsessed with it. It's on
Can you
Slack.
describe that in a sentence? Or
Yes. So, you're like, oh, I just roasted this person. It's like that, but honey, like it's a sweet
Happy.
roast, right?
Okay.
So you're like throwing great feedback at them. You're celebrating accomplishments. Startups by nature, I think, do this. Everyone I've walked into, we have a kudos channel or a shout out channel. So there's your open door. Just sneak your foot into that performance review. And first, get really good at giving good feedback. So not just celebrating folks, relate it to a value, relate it to an OKR. Okay, cool. So now we're not just giving feedback. We're giving feedback in context of goals. Cool. So I think then the next step, how do we give tough feedback in context of goals? Like, where did we maybe miss the mark? Where was something off? And how can we go ahead and have that conversation now rather than waiting to a review? So I think that's when your HR business partnership comes in, when you really start hearing about, hey, what's going on? How are your goals? Oh, well, that person just got honey roasted, but it sounds like maybe there's a dip. How can we get in there and support that? And then you start introducing difficult conversations. And then I think from there, you can start saying, all right, y'all, we're already having these conversations. They're happening at different times around the organization. We're big enough now that we need to start thinking about rewards and recognition. So to help enable that, we're going to put some formality around these conversations once or twice a year. And at the end of those conversations, we're going to use these metrics to help determine these rewards. So it's really like it's not a flip the switch, which is what I thought you wanted to do. Like, okay, yay, we're doing performance reviews. No. We're going to get really good at giving feedback. We're going to get really good at addressing hard conversations. Then we're going to build a program around performance reviews. And then we're going to tailor that program, the questions, the evaluation or the ratings, or this, I like to use the word sentiments. We'll construct all of that. So when you go into the process, it just feels like a structured conversation you're already having.
Yeah.
With metrics.
Something I'm really interested in, and I'm wondering if some of the hindrances of the flick the switch, we're doing this now, is the one size fits all of every team is doing it this way. Whereas the engineering team functions in sprints. Maybe it makes more sense for them to do this on a cadence of when a sprint ends, let's reflect and have this conversation, versus a sales team that works on quarterly goals, end of quarter, let's have these conversations, versus another team that works on monthly goals, hit the end of the month, let's have these conversations. And maybe instead of like, hey, we're all doing quarterly. That doesn't really fit. We're in the middle of a sprint right now. We can't
It's
stop.
the end of Q3 and I'm in sales.
Right? Like
exactly.
And I just wonder if trying not to get the whole organization doing the exact same thing while doing the same thing actually might be helpful.
Traditionally, where that comes from, and I think that leads us into the next gorgeous phase of this conversation, is the link between pay and performance, right? You know, so you would sit with your CFO, you do your budget, you'll say, okay, we're allocating X amount for reviews next year for pay increases. Review thing happens, you then have to sit with that shitty bell curve and calibration meetings. I swear to God, if I ever have to sit in one more calibration meeting in the rest of my life, it will be one too many, because that is the most horrendous experience ever, where Johnny and sales over here is arguing why Betty and client success over here, why they're both fives and they should be fives.
Totally different jobs. We're stack ranking people. No, that's awful. I agree.
So Danny, I think that traditionally where that came from, and I think now that we're actually realizing,
because all that is happening at the same time, all the reviews
it has to happen at
the same
time.
And happen at the same cadence.
It has to happen at the same time, or it did have to happen at the same time. But I think, you know, what you guys have both said is absolutely, guess what? We don't have to keep doing the same shit. We can smash this up and start again. And I think that startups are in that really great position where they can get it right from day one. They don't have to follow these same practices. But leads us to the $65 million question. Do we think that reviews should be directly linked to pay reviews, or do we think that they should be separate interactions? Because I've got very strong feelings on this, but I'd be interested to hear what Kim thinks.
Yeah. Oh man, I've got a garbage truck going by me, which is just a stellar timing for this. Okay, so some controversial opinions that are rooted in me being a longtime HR person. I don't think calibration is bad. Calibration meetings are bad, but look, people judge and grade and perceive differently. So I do think if we are going to in any way match performance to compensation, we need to ensure there's a calibration. Like,
agreed. Yeah,
fairness,
yeah,
right?
fairness.
And we can do that with numbers. We can do that with metrics. We can do that in a really objective way and not a subjective way. I do believe performance should be rewarded in some way with compensation. I don't think that should be the exclusive metric. I think when we're thinking about rewards and recognition, whether it's a bonus, a compensation increase, a promotion, whatever, there are a few factors we look at. We look at tenure. We look at sustained performance. Just because you nailed that project, awesome, you nailed that thing, but it doesn't mean you mastered the competency behind it, which is
that is so good.
It is a real tough conversation to have with somebody who's like high on achievement, and we're like, yes, but you're not ready for the next level yet.
Yeah.
You may have won that race, but you're not going to the Olympics, babe.
Yeah.
Yeah. You did the lap around the neighborhood and you did it in record time, but can you do the marathon?
Yeah, but I mean, you did it with the wind at your back, right? Like,
right, yeah.
Can you do it against Shikari?
Yeah.
Can you do it in Palm Springs in July?
Yeah. So often the short-term wins, those spikes, happen more because of luck than they do because of skill or competency.
And a new manager who, wow, that was amazing. And maybe that new manager doesn't have a deep understanding of mastering competencies, because if we're in a startup, we're scrappy. Like, are we rewarding that appropriately? So I think when we get into thinking about performance reviews and rewards and recognition, it's finding that right balance. Like, hey, you're a high performer. Maybe that means your comp ratio is a little bit higher than your peers, but also that's probably complemented with time and role, tenure at the company, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much more than just performance.
Yeah. And 100%. I'm very much of the opinion that Well, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, let me be clear. But some of the most successful practices I've seen is where they are kind of almost treated separately, but not quite, in terms of the company trying to really stand behind that knowledge of psychological safety, all moving in the same direction. I'm not going to say rowing because we don't like that term here. It's pretty toxic. But the notion... Exactly. The notion of there being a momentum and everyone moving in a similar direction. If that helps the company achieve the overall goal and everyone's played a part in that, so long as their performance is, being consistent and and they've met some criteria, reward everyone, right? Everyone has a part to play, whether you're the person on the reception desk at the front door, the person who's emptying the trash at night, or the person who's sitting, making some really big decisions. Everyone's playing a part and everyone should be rewarded for that. So I feel quite strongly about that, because how are you ever going to achieve a team mentality if you treat everyone really on an individual basis? But at the same time, you're bang on with your ideas around, how we talk about pay increases and preparation for the next step up. It can't be done on a whim, and it can't just be done because, well, I have a subjective opinion about that person, so we're going to do that, and I don't care what anyone else says. That's where that you can put amazing work into building psychological safety, but it just takes one rogue actor to undo all that work. I also think that this is where fractional, in my opinion, really comes into play, because it's money well spent to bring in someone who is, a comp and ben, TR specialist, whatever, to come in and work with you to design something that really works for your business, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all approach that you saw at a company 10 years ago and you thought that might work, because it
worked for you then. You benefited from it.
It's a different workforce, your problem industry.
The world has changed. And I think that it's money well spent. Bring someone in who really understands the detail of that. And as a generalist, I don't, right? I can do a good job. And I know enough. I know enough to be dangerous. But I don't live in that world every day. Yeah. And so I would invest that money, bring someone in and build something that's really meaningful and purposeful for your business.
And I mean, why not? Like, sorry, but like, I've been a team of one so many times and obsessed with people ops, and I don't have deep experience everywhere. So like, if you've got a team of one HR person or an HR generalist that you've hired, it's okay to like contract a leadership voice a little bit, right? Yeah. Like, get that extra experience in without needing to pay that tab.
Absolutely.
But
if any fractional compensation experts want to advertise on the podcast, please reach out to us at elephant at fearlesspx.com.
Yeah, I will. I'm also gonna, I don't know if I'm allowed to shout him out. Matt McFarlane has done some really cool. Yeah.
Big fan of Matt.
Big fan of Matt. He's doing some cool stuff in the fractional comp benchmarking space.
Yeah. Oh,
so
nice.
Like,
cool. So
for all you
advertising.
Fractionals, for all you fractionals out there, check it
out. We should try and get Matt on the podcast, because he's got incredible insights.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I'm hearing is to link pay with performance. We'd be much better suited if the performance that we were measuring were the skills and competencies, right? And I think that's one of the biggest misses is we're so focused on the output, the production, the task completion, that we're not looking at, how just good is this person in their role that supports this function of the company? And I don't know if it's a Western thing or a generational thing, but so often it is I'm here to do my job. If I do my job, I should be doing another job or be doing the same job for more money, as opposed to I'm just really good at my job. And if that stays my job for 20 years, I'm going to be like the best ever. Yeah. Right. Like I keep going back to like that expedition mindset of like, there's someone whose job it is to take care of like the clothes to make sure everyone's clothed well. And, they can seam stuff. And if something breaks or rips or burns up, they can replace it and do all those things. Like, that is a necessary person. If you're like, wow, you did so well, we're moving you up to some bigger responsibility, you're now losing something. Right? Like, it's so complicated to me. But just, I live in sort of theory world with my whole philosophy degree.
No, I love it. I love it because I think it's so everybody's path is unique, right? And the companies that have these up or out policies, they're going to lose those really workhorse is not the right term, but like if you love your job and you're good at it and it affords you the work-life balance, the fulfillment, the joy that you want, great, kick ass in that role and let me support you however I can. Now let's have real conversations about how staying in this role might cap your income opportunities. What are some other things we can do to keep you engaged? Like, let's have that conversation. But if you just love your fucking job and want to do it well and be done with it, I am here to support that.
Well, and I think it's I feel like what happens sometimes, right? And I'm only speaking about American culture here, is the connection between performance and progression, right? Like, oh, you're doing really well, we're going to move you vertically. And there are some people who are like, well, that's great, but that puts me in a people management position and that's not what I want.
Yeah.
I'd like to pay. That sounds great, because it ain't getting cheaper to live nowhere. But there's that connection, right? Of like, oh, you're doing really well. Now your performance is now correlated to progression. And that's not I think Marion, to use that phrase, right? Not a one size fits all approach at all.
No. And there's a lot of rethinking of how we perceive things exactly like that. And it's not just an American thing, Cacha. I've lived in India, happens there. In the UK, happens there. Middle East, happens there. Like everywhere I've lived and worked, it's exactly the same thing.
Well, I'm glad it wasn't just an isolated thing. I just didn't want to be assumptive, I mean, the world's a big place and I've only lived here.
I think in Europe, we're certainly a lot more chill and a bit more progressive in a lot of areas. But fundamentally, I don't even know if this is cultural. I think it's basic human instinct. It's visceral. I am pre-programmed to believe that I'm only worth something if I'm progressing, right? And it's so unhealthy. We've got so many things that are deep in us that are really unhealthy, and it's great when we're able to start calling them out and giving ourselves permission to say, actually, do you know what? It's actually okay if you don't want to do that. It's okay. And don't let anyone tell you any different, So that's
just a little piece of advice that I had a hard time swallowing this last year as I've gone out and been a solopreneur and independent. Your worth is not your salary. Like, I know maybe you grew up like me and you think your worth is your salary, but like,
I would also like my salary to be a little closer though.
I mean, I would like my salary to match my worth, but your salary is not your worth. So it's cool. Like, hey, if that performance review didn't go so well and you didn't quite get the outcome, like you're all right. You're all right. Take a breath, take a beat, reset yourself up. And think about what's next.
Absolutely. But the flip side of that is don't devalue yourself.
Oh, yeah, right.
If you're in salary negotiation, and you're negotiating with someone who's really just out to try and get you at the lowest price possible because they think you're cattle effectively, and you're not a human being that actually brings something to the table. Don't. Stand your ground.
Yeah.
And because it's cancerous, right? The second that you accept yourself at a lower value, your psychological contract is already heavily fractured, and you'll be out the door, right? So
you're always going to be like keeping that one eye out for that minimum that you wanted, and
pay people what they're worth. God damn it.
Yeah. There was a really interesting, and it's really changed how I sort of negotiate and view these things. Adam Grant, in one of his books, I think it was Give and Take, he did a meta-analysis of negotiations around salary. And women were like the worst at negotiating for themselves. But when given the task to negotiate salary for other people, women got huge, like 30-40% more than the other group studied.
Yeah.
And the idea was like, well, it's for them. I can totally gas them up and really fight hard for them. Yeah. And so there's that mentality shift of don't just say like, oh, I would like this much because I think, but I'm willing to meet you in the middle. Negotiate as if your kids depend on you making more money.
Absolutely.
As your dogs depend on it, right? Negotiate for them as opposed to just for yourself. And that's been a big shift for me.
As my dog snores loudly behind me.
Mine's doing the same. She is.
Oh, mine's still downstairs in bed. Couldn't even bother to get up. But no, I agree. I think there's a lot like don't devalue yourself. And we're getting out of performance and into rewards and recognition. But like understand like what the performance expectations are. Truly know the competencies. And when you are negotiating, when you are proving your value, say how you have displayed, hey, I didn't just close that deal. Look how I overcame the objections. Look how I provided more value. And I didn't just do it once. Yeah. There's now been 4
You're customers. The sustained showing of skills and competencies that I'm just good at my role.
Yes. Look, I have a framework that I use that I am giving to more junior folks that are able to now replicate it. Like that is a mastery.
Creating so much value. Absolutely. I love that, Kim. And I think that's maybe to bring this back to performance, right? Like what are some of the, right, and also time, we need to start wrapping up. Yeah. What are some of the, at the end of this conversation, ideas of effective change that we could do to really start highlighting and measuring and talking about those sustained skills and competencies that make us good at our role as a function of the organizational goals?
So here's my TLDR of it, and it's fitting that we're wrapping up this conversation. One, I think we need to use better language. Stop using weird questions. Stop it. Like people are spending.
Just put that on as a post-it on every performance management platform.
Stop using weird questions because people are spending so much mental energy again trying to figure out what am I supposed to say here?
What's HR want me to say? Yeah.
Yeah. And like, how do I answer to get paid more? Right? Like that's the back in their mind.
And how do I answer to not throw my peers and friends under the bus?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. There's so many mental factors people really go through.
Yeah. So use better language. Make space for more informal conversations. It doesn't always have to be a formally administered review process. Get those reflections into your retro cadence. And, we should have spent way more time on this, but stop using words like meets expectations. Stop using numbers. Like, please don't rate your people how they're doing in productivity and values and this and that. They're not a Yelp review. Like teach better language in your performance reviews. Make it more human. It doesn't have to be meets expectations. They're nailing it. They're nailing their role. They're in the perfect role at the perfect time. Go crush it.
Yeah. And that and that might translate to around a 3 on the traditional scale, right? Like nailing it is like, yes,
and I don't have to worry about you. That 3 for the data and analytics in the back end, but we're inspiring the person.
Yes, never, ever, ever say it in front of a human being, ever, because when you keep linking them together, we're never going to change the conversation. So, you completely separate that language.
Yeah. And I think, again, just having these conversations more often. Look, what questions your HR team is going to ask in their performance reviews. How about once a quarter, once a month, repurpose your one-on-one with your team and just say, hey, we're going to use these questions as a talking guide and we're going to have a conversation. And this is just a check-in. And this will help prevent surprises on your annual review, on your whatever. So I think just holding time and space for better conversations would do us a world of good.
And on that note, I think that, just to give you a bit of selfless promotion, Kim, but you've been working on something rather cool to help people with this. Is that right?
Oh my gosh, I do. I have a playbook out. It's called Reviews Suck, because they do.
They do.
It is the startup's guide to better performance reviews, or anyone who wants better performance conversations. It kind of walks you through these building block foundations of setting expectations, infusing your values, how to think about data in your performance reviews. And then guides you through building through a great process, building better questions, thinking about evaluation metrics. And if you don't want to do any of that, there is a copy and paste template ready to go for you. We'll link it in this episode, but it's codetravelerhr.com/reviews suck, or just find me on LinkedIn, Kim Minnick. I post every day. I'm so obnoxious, but I have a good time. I'm here to make
not obnoxious.
You're definitely not obnoxious. You're just like us. You're just full of fun and mischief. We love that.
I'm just here to add some fun to your LinkedIn feed. That's all it is.
Kim's just in your LinkedIn feed spitting facts and making you go, what? Oh, ooh.
Yeah. Or posting really weird selfies, because I don't know. I don't use Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or
I
WhatsApp.
call it TikTok too.
Yeah, no, I'm an elder millennial. I can't adopt, but LinkedIn. I am here.
Amazing.
Oh, this was so fun.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for listening. Be sure to like, subscribe, leave those 5-star reviews. If you didn't catch the email earlier, you can contact us at elephant@thefearlesspx.com. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.